How are thought leadership and brand building related? And how can you leverage your organization's strengths in one area to grow the other? To explore this question with me, I reached out to Emmanuel Probst and asked him to join me on the show. Emmanuel is the global lead for brand thought leadership for Ipsos. He's an adjunct at UCLA, and he's the author of the recently published Wall Street Journal bestselling business book titled Brand Hacks. In this conversation, I'm eager to talk with Emmanuel about brand building, brand meaning, and thought leadership. We'll also talk about his own work as a thought leadership practitioner at Ipsos. I'm Bill Sherman, and you're listening to Leveraging Thought Leadership. Ready? Let's begin. Welcome to the show, Emmanuel.
Bill, thank you for having me.
So, you sit at an absolutely fascinating position. You're at the intersection of thought leadership and brand. And I'm eager to have this conversation because for a long time, I've been saying that brand building and thought leadership are interconnected. But let's start with one before we start mashing the two up. So you talk about the quest for meaning in brand. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I feel, or rather, I noticed that most consumers, most people don't care about most brands. People don't want more products, more services, more advertising, more brands. What people are really trying to achieve in their lives, even more so after COVID than before, is to find meaning, to engage in activities that are fulfilling and that are meaningful to them. And my point to marketers through this book, Brand Hacks, is to say, let's understand those meanings that people are trying to fulfill. From there, build brands that will contribute to fulfilling these meanings.
And one of the things that you talk about a lot is creating emotional connection. And I think a lot of old school marketing is based on creating a sense of fear or fear of missing out, right? And you talk a lot about positive emotions. So what is it that you think that many marketers are just not getting today? What are they getting wrong about brand?
Well, I think a lot of marketers focus on short tactics. And to their defense, that's because of the way their goals set it. They worry about driving traffic to their website or their store this weekend, and they worry about sales and key performing indicators for this quarter. And I think that regardless of the level they're at, there are very few marketers that truly engage in a long-term strategy for their brand, perhaps because the untold secret in this industry is people know that they will not be in that job in 3 years. And again, this applies to a recent grad starting at an agency or at a brand. And candidly, it also applies to a C-level executive with 20 plus years experience in marketing. So I think that's the miss, is to focus too heavily on those short-term tactics. Back to your point, Bill, you spoke about fear of missing out. Well, that's typically a tactic that's going to work very well to drive traffic. Literally this weekend, we are recording on Friday morning. You can push some digital ads this afternoon to drive traffic to your store tomorrow morning. However, that's, if not at the expense of the miss here, is building the brand by conveying positive feelings and by instilling positivity and joy and empathy in advertising and in marketing. For sure, you experience less immediate results. However, you build a brand that people will come back to in the long term.
And so I think one of the things that you're calling out is the long-term relationship and fulfilling a need that an individual is looking to find either emotional connection or meaning in their life, and that can't be just sort of pressing one button and evoking a stimulus response. They have to bring the brand and the idea of the brand into themselves and sort of wrap it up in their identity a little bit, right?
Exactly. So examples of these meanings for our listeners today, it's about happiness, it's about nostalgia, it's about joy, empathy. It's about coziness and comfort in your home. All these are examples of meanings that matter to people, that people seek to fulfill. And the question is your brand going to be part of the solution? But you're right to say that you're looking at a long-term brand strategy. And I want to be clear, I have nothing against tactical moves. In fact, they're very relevant and very necessary. I'm saying, however, that this should not come at the expense of building the brand and supporting that big idea that you have for your brand, because what will matter within the next 2 to 5 years is meaning and brand identity, not so much the FOMO ad that you pushed on Friday afternoon to drive traffic over the weekend.
And you talked about in there the idea. And one of the things that I've said over many years is that thought leadership is about building a brand and a brand experience for an idea. That it's not just putting an idea out into the world once, whether that's in an article or a podcast, and hoping that people stumble on it and they go, oh, that's brilliant, I'll incorporate it in my life. That it really, like brand building, has to be done through repetition. So I'd love to hear, since you're sitting at the intersection of brand, both as an academic and teaching, as well as a practitioner at Ipsos, how do you explain thought leadership and how do you see it connecting with brand?
Well, thank you, Bill. I think listening to what you just said, brand, academia, brand hacks, and the work we do at Ipsos, all this is really connected. And at the end of the day, thought leadership serves all of the above and is a product of all of the above. Let me explain. I think thought leadership is one about being different, having a standpoint on an issue or on a strategy that is original, if you will. It's also about, let's think in the long term. That is, and here again, of course, sometimes we write tactical POVs after COVID or data breach or something like this. Nothing wrong with this. But most of the work we do, we try to create ideally evergreens or things that have a very long shelf life. When you talk about brand purpose and sustainability and comfort and coziness and ecosystem brands, those are examples of themes that have a long shelf life. And last but not least, for me, thought leadership should call on a wide range of sources. And here again, that's where we can link this to the work I do with my students at UCLA, is be curious and leverage first-party data and second-party data and both primary and secondary research and read from a wide range of publications. And that's really what I like to do. Yesterday, I presented a piece on the data dilemma. So how do tech firms collect and monetize data? And this presentation relied on 18 different sources. I want to think that what makes for an engaging conversation and for an engaging piece and for something that is robust and credible, because it's not me, just me saying this. It's a point of view that's supported by 18 other publications or data sources.
Well, and I'm going to take this a couple different directions, but we'll tackle them one by one. So one of the things that you called out at the beginning is there's a sense of integration of self for yourself. The work that you do at UCLA versus the work you do at Ipsos versus the work you do as the author, that is all part of you, and they're not discrete functions. They reinforce each other and they come out of the same mind, right? And so the questions that you're asking at work lead to the conversations of teaching, I would assume.
Precisely, and the other way around. Historically, academia and the practitioners' world have not communicated well. I think because academia is too much in the lab, and I'll just say very bluntly, snobbish at times, with conceptual frameworks and ideas that are 1, 2, cumbersome to understand and to just not actionable. And conversely, practitioners might be superficial at times. So in my opinion, in my experience or my quest, if you will, in my teaching and in my writing and my work at Ipsos is to reconcile these two bodies of knowledge, understand that they can really benefit from one another and bring to students case studies from what we do at Ipsos and conversely inspire our clients at Ipsos with key concepts that are being developed in academia. Very often, great concepts, again, in my experience, are developed in academia first and then adapted to the practitioner's world. And I have one too many examples of authors that came up with books that are positioned as brand new, when in fact the idea stemmed from academia 10 years prior.
Well, and I think the relationship between academia and practitioners, they move at different velocities, right? So if you're working on a client project, the speed that you have in terms of creating a hypothesis, testing it, and executing a solution, you move at a different pace than a research pace and a publication. And let's form the hypothesis, let's collect data. Academics have the leisure of time in some ways, but they often then scramble for finding data sets and being able to collect data.
Yes, I strongly agree. And in fact, as we are talking through this bill, I feel that the gap between academia and practitioners will likely be even greater in the next few years. And here's why. Academic publications haven't changed. If you open the Journal of Consumer Research, the Journal of Advertising Research, all those academic journals that are extremely rich in terms of ideas and insights. However, from a formatting standpoint, well, they are formatted the way they were 20 years ago. And in a world of bite-sized learning, not 3,500 words paper with not even one picture in black and white and font size 10.
Well, and many marketing journals wind up having papers that are full of Greek symbols
Yes.
and calculus that you have to sit down and take time to digest to see what are they actually saying. The idea isn't, like you said, in bite size, here's the aha, the data's here if you want to back it up, but we package the insight in a consumable way.
And maybe, Bill, here, I cannot name the client, but I have a technology client. Let's just say that it's a leading technology firm, one of the 10 biggest technology firms in the world. And as you may guess, when I present there, the room is full of PhDs and people that attended the best schools in America. Now, what they want, you'd be surprised. They want to see smileys and emojis on the decks, and they want to see a maximum of 100 words on a given slide. And we kill almost all the charts we have, or they don't want to see anything that has to do with statistical significance or what we call top two box in market research. And my point being that you literally have the smartest people in the room, not only all at least MBAs, most of them PhDs, but from leading institutions like Yale and Harvard and Stanford, yet they want emojis on their slides. So this really illustrates how the world of practitioners, no matter how smart and educated, want this messaging of bite-sized learning. Tell me a story, tell me a narrative, something that is visually appealing, easy to understand, and actionable.
And that, I think, is sort of an evolution back. We had many decades ago in the 1980s, USA Today started printing infographics on the front page, and everybody sort of laughed and chuckled and said, oh, that's too simplistic. It can't be used for serious purpose. But now, if you're making a presentation to a C-level executive, a one-page placemat that simplifies complex ideas to something that they can grasp in a short amount of time and make a decision is essential. And even on an operational level, like you were talking about, can you distill information, take the idea to something actionable rather than force them to slog through 3 hours of reading to figure out whether or not they agree with you?
And to your point, Bill, I think one way in which we thought leaders, the audience, our audience today, we need to challenge ourselves is the big idea you're trying to convey. You need to be able to convey this idea on a 7-inch screen on a cell phone. We can develop on this, of course. We can do presentations and papers and all that. But to me, it has to be a bumper sticker. And in fact, it's not even the size of a bumper sticker. Your audience, no matter if they're a C-level executive in marketing or a recent grad or even an intern, must be able to understand the gist of your idea and your argument on a screen that size.
If you are enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about the podcast, please leave a 5-star review and share it with your friends. We are available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and all major platforms, as well as at leveragingthoughtleadership.com. And with that, I think we are conditioned that smart ideas come in long form. Certainly as academics, we're trained that way. We get out into the business world and then realize that the pace of business doesn't allow that careful nuancing of ideas and long form exposition, to the point where people will look at a TED Talk and they almost wear it as a badge of honor that they watched the full TED Talk all 18 minutes instead of, I just scanned. And so the pace of idea communication has to match the pace of life.
I think I'm glad we're talking about this. It's a mistake to think that good ideas are complicated. I think for our audience today, for our thought leaders, being smart is about articulating a complex idea with words that are easy to understand. Let me rephrase this. It's actually very difficult to do something simple. The point being is, there's no point trying to impress the audience with acronyms and buzzwords. That's annoying, it's condescending, and frankly, in my experience, it's divisive. Because if someone in the room doesn't know the acronym, it's undermining for that individual, right? So it creates a gap between the thought leader and the audience. I think what's really smart is to take a complex idea and instead of trying to brag with those buzzwords, acronyms, and conceptual frameworks, is to articulate this idea literally at the back of a napkin. That's the real smart move. And that is gathering an audience and rallying people behind your idea, as opposed to creating a divide and pontificating or lecturing people.
And with that, the amount of work it takes to take a complex idea and make it simple, intuitive, and relevant to an audience, there's a lot of, I think of like a duck swimming on the water, right? They look like they're moving smoothly on the surface, but they're paddling like mad underneath, right? And so that thought leadership practice, you want to make it simple to your audience, which means you've got to do a lot of work under the surface.
And here, Bill, I think that's where we can all learn something from the advertising creative industry. It's not all about data. It's a lot about creativity. And in advertising, just like in thought leadership, I think it's very hard to do something simple that resonates with a wide audience. When you think about Geico, where you can save 15% in 15 minutes on car insurance, you and I are, if I say this, you're thinking, what, duh, yeah, of course. It's not that easy to come up with a statement that is clear, concise, memorable, and in the case of Geico, is even a little bit quirky and entertaining in a vertical that, no offense to Geico, but I cannot think of anything less engaging and more daunting than shopping for car insurance. Maybe life insurance is worse, but that's just about it, right? So all this to say that this is the genius move, in my opinion, is to come up with a clear and concise idea that's going to make category and watching paint dry appealing and entertaining to the audience.
And the ability to distill an idea down into something that communicates not only the facts of the idea, but the relevance to me as a listener. And your Geico example, in what is it, 5 to 8 seconds that you can say that phrase, I know what does this mean to me, and I can make that quick decision. Do I listen or do I move on? And I think if you think about the academic paper as the antithesis of that, right? Yeah, I might read the abstract at the top, but the abstract only gives me the first bite of the apple. Often I have to dig through much deeper to figure out, okay, what's the aha here?
Well, academic papers have one more shortcoming, I feel, Bill. You spoke about the format and the length. You also have a lot of prerequisites in terms of what you have to know. If you read an academic paper on consumer experience and you haven't read before the work of Holbrook and Carew and Kova and Bernschmidt and all those academics, the truth is you're going to miss a lot of the paper, or it makes for a very difficult read because you're going to have to research the references as you read, and now it's literally going to take you 3 hours. So here again, I think, don't get me wrong, this is a great contribution to knowledge and it's great work. It's just not approachable for most people.
It's incremental. So let's turn to your work at Ipsos, and I know you've been alluding to it through the conversation, but how does your work as a thought leadership practitioner yourself, you have thought leadership in your title, actually. What are you doing and how are you bringing thought leadership to your clients?
So Bill, I'm not saying this lightly. I have my dream job.
Say more. That's awesome.
I sincerely mean it. So here's what we do. We listen to what the market wants to learn, wants to hear, wants to monetize. And from there, we create pieces that we believe are different and illustrate the standpoint of Ipsos. And the third thing is those are not just POVs and papers and webinars. Those are pieces that inform RFPs and RFIs we take part in, and proposals and client presentations, and we do standalone presentations as well. It informs memos, executive summaries, and also quarterly presentations, monthly presentations, and so on and so forth. So the point being is, just like in advertising and branding, once again, we work on a big idea. From there, we create a variety of formats depending on the audience. Some of those materials are catered to a wide audience and have more of a marketing type objective, if you will. And some of those materials are very specific, proprietary to our clients.
And I think a third category that you mentioned is there's an internal communications piece so that the idea gets disseminated across the organization.
Exactly. And maybe we can take an example. I was referring earlier to the piece I presented yesterday that has to do with how tech brands collect, analyze, and monetize data. And for this piece, we have a POV that's available online that's called the data dilemma. And this is accessible to a wide audience, about 1,200 words. It reads very, very easily. We also have client-specific presentations that are proprietary to our clients, and we present the same idea to our technology clients with data that might be proprietary to them and recommendations that matter to them and to them only.
Got it. So you're able, again, we're coming back to that theme of relevance so that they understand, why is this worth my time?
Precisely. What we call the so what, now what. How does that to me. So we want to communicate an idea that is relevant to the market, that is different, original, a little bit quirky if we can, and in a format that's going to resonate with the audience, and importantly, with takeaways that matter to you. And you need to be able to take action. And I think that's once again, here again, a difference between academic papers and what practitioners need, whereby most academic papers are inspirational in nature, but will be very, very hard to implement.
So you've mentioned it quirky before with Geico, and you mentioned quirky again. And I love that encouragement to bring a little bit of joy, a little bit of humor into the work, because I think it makes it more engaging and more memorable. My question for you is, given your expertise with brand and also your work with thought leadership, if someone wants to build an idea as thought leadership, what advice would you give them from brand building? So the idea as brand.
I think first, just like in any type of competitive analysis, you want to understand almost everything that's been done and published on the topic. And from there, you want to develop a standpoint that is salient and different from your competition. Here again, it's not any different from thought leadership than it is for any other product or service or any other brand that you're trying to push. And now then, depending on your industry and your status, you can be more or less provocative. I'm using this word quirky because quirky is fun. And at the same time, it's non-threatening. As you guess, or as you know, working for Ipsos or when you work for a large agency, of course, there are standpoints you cannot and should not take on brands, right? Simply because clients. Quirky is always good. It's always entertaining. It makes for a good story. So that's my advice is if you want to write something on purpose and sustainability, the reality is that you're going to find literally 60 papers from competing agencies on the topic. And from there, you'll tease out some ideas, but you need to identify this gap in knowledge, what's missing here from what everyone else is doing that you can bring to the market.
So as we begin to wrap up, I want to turn back to something that you said. You said you are literally in your dream job now, doing thought leadership. What advice would you give to yourself as a younger version of you coming into this role or finding this role? And the reason I ask is we have listeners who are earlier in their career in thought leadership or looking to get into thought leadership. What advice would you give?
In very few organizations, thought leadership is a standalone job or it takes a very long time to get to that point. For years, I did thought leadership as a side project. Today, it's about 50% of my role. I also have some P&L responsibilities and revenue responsibilities. But again, that's an exception. So my advice is you folks should develop thought leadership as a side gig, as a side project. And the good news is you can stand out. You will be recognized for this. It's going to take time. There is something great about thought leadership, though. In my experience, it's an equalizer. Here's what I mean. The quality of the idea, the quality of the writing has almost nothing to do with your job title and the level you're at. In other words, in all organizations, Ipsos is full of smart people. I see in all organizations, though, in ad agencies, media planning agencies, branding agencies, you have executive VPs, partner level people that write 2 pieces a year and it's poorly written. And conversely, I have some account managers with 2 to 3 years industry experience on my team that put together beautiful memos and very insightful papers. So that's your opportunity as someone entering this industry or this line of work. I would say is don't be shy because unlike P&L responsibilities and leading client pitches and all those things where job titles and experience matter a lot, here in thought leadership, you can be 23 out of school and write something that is at least on par, in many cases superior from what your senior partner at your firm will produce.
And that's an exception, I think, to call out that you have the opportunity to speak with a voice which can be ahead of your years in your career.
And one more uplifting tip, if you will, Bill.
Please.
Access to information and access to tools is not important. So here's what I mean. If you want to become a client lead and, be the one talking at a 12, 15, $20 million presentation, you need experience, you need access to resources and information and people working for you. And there is a lot that goes into it. You need some authority. You need to make decisions on pricing and all that. Here in thought leadership, you need a notepad. You need Microsoft Word or any word processor, and you need access to the internet. My point being is, I write my books on a software. I won't mention the name of the software because who cares? But the full license, I think, is $45 for 3 years. And that software is used by me or the likes of Malcolm Gladwell or the likes of people writing movies, George Clooney, for example. So what I mean to say here is you need ideas and you need to be curious. But besides an old laptop, a notepad, and access to the internet, that's all you need in terms of resources.
There's a lot more that we could cover, Emmanuel, but I think that's a great encouraging note to end on, that the barriers for getting into thought leadership have never been lower. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you to our listeners today. Really appreciate your time.
If you're interested in organizational thought leadership, then I invite you to subscribe to the OrgTL newsletter. Each month, we talk about the people who create, curate, and deploy thought leadership on behalf of their organizations. Go to the website orgtl.com and choose Join Our Newsletter. I'll leave a link to the website as well as my LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to hearing what you thought of the show.